The voice calling my name from the darkness sounded exactly like my wife, except she was 300 miles away, and whatever was out there kept getting the inflection just slightly wrong. My name is Jake, and I've been a park ranger for the Cascade Mountain region for the better part of 12 years. I've seen missing hikers, dealt with aggressive wildlife, and pulled people out of situations that should have killed them. I thought I'd experienced everything these mountains could throw at me, until that October night when something threw my own life back at me. It started as routine as any other patrol. The Henderson Trail needed a final sweep before winter closure, a 23-mile loop that winds through some of the most remote sections of our district. Most rangers do this run with a partner, but I've been walking these paths since I was 15, long before I carried a badge. I knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every spot where cell service drops to nothing. The weather forecast called for clear skies and dropping temperatures. Perfect conditions for what I planned as an overnight solo run. I'd camp at Miller's Point, about 15 miles in, then finish the circuit the next morning. Standard procedure. Filed my route with dispatch. Checked my gear twice. Sarah, my wife, wasn't thrilled about me going alone. "Why can't you take Rodriguez?" she asked as I loaded my pack. "It's not like the Park Service can't spare 2 rangers for one trail, because Rodriguez is covering the Valley Patrol," I told her, testing the weight distribution of my gear, "and because I've done this run solo probably 50 times. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon." She kissed me goodbye with that worried look she gets. The same expression she wore when I first started this job. "Call me when you reach Miller's Point? Honey, you know there's no signal up there. Then call me when you get back to the trailhead tomorrow." I mean it, Jake. Don't make me worry. I promised I would, and I kept that promise. Eventually. But not in any way either of us could have anticipated. The first 13 miles passed without incident. Perfect autumn weather, trail conditions better than expected, no signs of recent bear activity. I made good time, reaching the turnoff to Miller's Point by 4:30 p.m. with plenty of daylight to set up camp. Miller's Point sits on a granite outcropping that overlooks the Clearwater Valley. It's one of those spots that makes you understand why people become addicted to the backcountry. Endless views, clean air, and a silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. I've camped there dozens of times, and it never gets old. I had my tent up and dinner cooking by 6 p.m. The sun was setting behind the western ridgeline, painting the sky in those impossible shades of orange and pink that cameras never capture properly. I ate my freeze-dried chili mac, made some notes in my patrol log, and settled in to enjoy the kind of evening that reminds you why you chose this life. That's when I heard Sarah call my name. "Jake. Jake. Where are you?" Her voice drifted up from somewhere down the trail, faint but unmistakable. My wife's voice, with that slight breathiness she gets when she's been hiking. For a split second, I felt this surge of confusion. Had she followed me, driven up to the trailhead and hiked in? But that didn't make sense. Sarah's idea of roughing it is a hotel without room service. She'd never attempt a 15-mile hike in the dark, especially not on a trail she'd never walked before. "Jake, I need help." The voice came again, closer this time, but still from down the trail. Something about the tone made my skin crawl. It sounded like Sarah, but wrong somehow. Like someone doing a really good impression but missing some subtle detail. I grabbed my flashlight and headlamp, moving to the edge of the outcropping where I could see the trail below. "Sarah? Is that you?" Silence. I called again, louder this time. "Sarah, if that's you, answer me." Nothing but the wind moving through the pines. My rational mind kicked in, running through logical explanations. Maybe it was another hiker, someone whose voice carried weird echoes off the rock faces. Maybe it was an animal, though no animal I knew could produce sounds that close to human speech. I waited 5 more minutes, listening hard. then decided to investigate. I strapped on my gear, grabbed my sidearm from the bear canister, and started down the trail. "Sarah?" I called every 50 yards or so. "Anyone out there?" 20 minutes of careful hiking brought me to a spot where the trail crossed a small creek. Good visibility in all directions, nowhere for someone to hide, but no sign of another person. That's when I heard it again. "Jake, why did you leave me?" The voice came from behind me now, back toward Miller's Point, but I'd just come from that direction. There was no way someone could have gotten past me without being seen, and this time, I was absolutely certain it was Sarah's voice. Not similar, identical. The same inflection she uses when she's hurt or scared, the same slight rasp from her old smoking habit. But Sarah was 300 miles away in Portland, probably watching Netflix and grading her third-grade students' homework. I jogged back up the trail, flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. Whatever game this was, I wanted it to stop. When I reached my campsite, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Tent, sleeping bag, the remains of my dinner. "Jake, I'm lost." The voice came from the opposite direction now, deeper into the wilderness, away from any established trail. And for the first time, I noticed the slight wrongness I'd been sensing. The way she drew out the A in my name. Sarah always cuts it short, makes it sound more like Jack. Whatever was calling to me was getting the basics right, but missing the subtle details. I sat down hard on a boulder, trying to process what I was experiencing. In 12 years of ranger work, I'd heard plenty of stories about strange encounters in the backcountry, voices calling from empty forests, sounds that didn't match any known wildlife. Hikers who swore they'd been followed by something that walked on two legs but moved wrong. I'd always filed those stories under "people get spooked in the wilderness," and their imagination fills in the gaps. I was starting to reconsider that position. "Jake, please, help me. I'm so scared." This time the voice broke, the way Sarah's does when she's trying not to cry. It was coming from a steep ravine about a quarter-mile from my camp, an area so thick with deadfall and undergrowth that even experienced hikers avoid it. And that's when I realized what was happening. Whatever was out there was trying to lure me away from my camp, away from the trail, into terrain where I'd be completely isolated and vulnerable. It was using Sarah's voice because it knew I'd respond to it, but it was learning as it went, getting better with each call. I backed toward my tent, keeping the flashlight moving in slow arcs around the perimeter of my camp. "I know you're not Sarah," I called out. "I don't know what you are, but I know you're not my wife." Silence. I waited, listening to my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. Minutes passed. Just when I started to think maybe I'd scared it off. "Why don't you believe me, Jake? It's really me. I drove up after you left. I was worried about you being alone out here." The voice was coming from just beyond the light of my campfire now, close enough that I should be able to see whoever was speaking. But there was nobody there, and this time, the impression was perfect. Exactly the way Sarah would say those words, with the slight defensiveness she gets when she thinks I'm not taking her concerns seriously. "Prove it," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Tell me something only Sarah would know." Another pause. Then, "Remember our first anniversary? When you took me to that little restaurant in Mount Hood Village and the waiter spilled wine all over your shirt?" My blood turned to ice water. That memory was accurate, except for one crucial detail. It hadn't been our first anniversary. It had been our second, close, but not perfect. I drew my sidearm, a Glock 22 that I'd hoped never to use on anything more dangerous than an aggressive bear. "Get away from my camp. Whatever you are, you're not welcome here. Jake, you're scaring me. Why are you pointing a gun at me? It's Sarah. It's your wife." The voice was plaintive now, confused and hurt. If I closed my eyes, I could picture Sarah's face, the expression she'd wear if I actually pointed a weapon at her, but I kept my eyes open, kept scanning the darkness beyond my campfire's reach. "Sarah knows I carry my Sig Sauer on patrol," I said. "She's seen it hundreds of times. She'd never call it just a gun." Silence stretched out for so long that I began to hope whatever was out there had given up and moved on. I was wrong. When the voice came back, it had changed. Still recognizably Sarah's, but with an undertone of something else. Something hungry. "You're very observant, Jake. Most people don't notice the little mistakes." The words seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if several speakers were positioned around my camp. But the voice remained consistent. Sarah's voice, twisted into something predatory. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping the gun trained on the darkness. "I want to know more about Sarah. You love her very much, don't you? Tell me about her." "Go to hell." A sound that might have been laughter echoed from the forest. "Tell me about Sarah, and I'll let you leave. Refuse, and I'll keep calling her name until you follow me into the woods. One way or another, Jake, you're going to help me perfect my impression." I realized with sick certainty that this thing had done this before. How many other missing hikers had followed a loved one's voice into the wilderness, never to be seen again? "I'll tell you about Sarah," I said, and I meant it. Because I had a plan. A desperate, probably stupid plan, but the only one I could think of. For the next hour, I talked. I told the thing about Sarah's favorite movies, her childhood pets, the scar on her knee from a bicycle accident when she was 8. I described her laugh, her habits, her fears, everything I could remember about the woman I'd married, and with every detail I shared, the voice that responded became more perfectly hers. The inflection, the cadence, even the way she breathed between words. It was learning, adapting, becoming a flawless copy, but I was learning too. I was paying attention to where the voice originated each time it spoke, mapping the creature's movement around my camp. It favored the downhill side, staying in the thicker undergrowth where it had better cover. When I ran out of stories about Sarah, the thing spoke again. "Thank you, Jake. That was very helpful. I think I have everything I need now." And then, in Sarah's voice, perfect and terrifying, "Jake, honey, could you come here? I think I hurt my ankle." It was exactly what Sarah would say, exactly how she'd say it. If I hadn't spent the last hour listening to this thing learn to copy her, I might have fallen for it. Instead, I turned off my flashlight and moved. I'd been studying these mountains for 12 years. I knew every rock, every tree, every game trail in this area, and I knew that directly behind my camp, about 30 yards uphill, was a steep drop-off that ended in a rock slide. In the darkness, moving by memory and feel, I circled around to position myself between the creature and the cliff. "Sarah?" I called softly. "Where are you, honey?" "Over here, Jake." "I'm right over here." I followed the voice, moving carefully in the darkness. When I estimated I was close enough, I flicked on my flashlight and pointed it directly ahead. The beam revealed something that my mind struggled to process. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent at wrong angles. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it moved with a fluid motion that was distinctly non-human. But the worst part was its face. Not Sarah's face. Not anyone's face. Just a smooth, blank surface that somehow projected her voice anyway. The creature froze in the sudden light, and for a moment we stared at each other across 20 feet of mountain wilderness. Then I fired 3 shots into the air and charged. The thing stumbled backward, clearly startled by the noise and sudden aggression. It took 2 more steps, and disappeared over the cliff edge with a sound like breaking branches. I crept to the edge and shone my light down. The rock slide below showed fresh disturbance, but no sign of the creature itself. I packed my gear and hiked out that night, using my headlamp and 19 years of trail experience to navigate in the darkness. I reached my truck just after dawn and drove straight to the ranger station. My supervisor wasn't thrilled about the early termination of my patrol, but I filed a standard wildlife encounter report and took 3 days of personal leave. I told Sarah I'd cut the trip short because of bad weather. 2 weeks later, I got a call from dispatch. 3 hikers were missing on the Henderson Trail, last seen heading toward Miller's Point. Search and rescue found their abandoned camp and some strange tracks in the soft earth nearby. They never found the hikers. I've requested transfer to a different district, somewhere far from the Cascade Mountains. Sarah thinks it's because I want a change of scenery, and I let her believe that, but sometimes, late at night when she's sleeping beside me, I hear her voice calling my name from the darkness outside our house. Always perfectly accurate now, always exactly right, and I know that thing is still out there, still learning, still calling to people in voices they trust. If you ever hear a loved one calling to you from the wilderness, especially if they're supposed to be somewhere else, don't follow that voice into the dark. Some things are better at being human than we are. I counted 7 pairs of eyes reflecting my flashlight beam, all at exactly the same height, forming a perfect circle around our campsite, and they never blinked. My name is Tom, and what happened to my family at Pine Ridge National Forest 3 summers ago still wakes me up in cold sweats. I've always been the outdoorsy type. Spent my childhood camping with my dad. Taught my own kids to fish and hike. I thought I knew how to handle myself in the wilderness. I was wrong about a lot of things. It was supposed to be a perfect family camping trip. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Emma, who was 12 then, and Connor, who'd just turned 8. We'd been planning this getaway for months. Pine Ridge was one of those places that shows up in all the camping magazines. Pristine forests, clear streams, established campgrounds with just enough amenities to keep everyone happy. The drive up was everything you'd expect from a family road trip. Connor complained about car sickness. Emma spent the entire time glued to her phone until we lost signal, and Lisa kept checking and rechecking our camping checklist. Normal stuff that I actually missed later, when normal became a luxury we couldn't afford. We arrived at Pine Ridge around 3 p.m. on a Friday in late August. The campground was moderately busy, maybe a dozen other sites occupied, but spread out enough that you felt like you had privacy. We nabbed spot 47, a nice corner location with mature pine trees on 3 sides and a clear view of the central meadow. Setting up camp went smoothly. Lisa and I have our routine down to a science after 15 years of marriage. She handles the sleeping arrangements while I wrestle with the tent poles. The kids, predictably, disappeared to explore the moment we parked. "Don't go past the bathroom facilities," I called after them, "and stay where we can see you." "We know, Dad," Emma yelled back, already dragging Connor toward a group of kids at a neighboring campsite. By 6 p.m., we had camp established and dinner cooking over the fire. Hot dogs and s'mores. Nothing fancy, but the kids love it. Other families were doing the same thing at their sites, and the whole scene had that perfect Americana feeling that makes you forget about work stress and mortgage payments. That's when I first noticed the people at the edge of the meadow. They were standing just inside the tree line, maybe 100 yards from our campsite. 3 figures, tall and thin, perfectly motionless. At first I assumed they were campers from one of the more remote sites, maybe waiting for something or just enjoying the view, but something about them bothered me. They stood too still, too straight, and even from that distance, they seemed to be facing our direction. "Honey, do you see those people over there?" I asked Lisa, pointing toward the tree line. She looked up from her camp chair, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "Where?" "Right there, by those big pines." 3 of them. Lisa squinted for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't see anyone." I looked again. The figures were still there, unchanged. "You seriously don't see them?" "Tom, There's nobody there. Maybe it's just shadows from the trees. I kept watching as we finished dinner. The figures never moved, never shifted position. When full darkness fell and I couldn't see them anymore, I felt oddly relieved. That night, Connor woke up around 2 a.m. claiming he needed to use the bathroom. I offered to walk him to the facilities, but he insisted he was old enough to go alone. The bathroom was only 50 yards away, well lit and clearly visible from our tent. I was just drifting back to sleep when I heard him scream. I was out of my sleeping bag and running before I was fully awake. Lisa was right behind me, calling Connor's name. We found him halfway between the bathroom and our campsite, standing frozen in the middle of the path. "Connor? What's wrong?" Lisa reached him first, dropping to her knees to check for injuries. He was shaking, pointing toward the darkness beyond the campground's perimeter. "There are people watching us, Mom. Tall people. They were standing right there when I came out of the bathroom." I followed his pointing finger with my flashlight beam, scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows and swaying branches. "I don't see anyone, buddy." "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" "I wasn't dreaming." Connor's voice pitched higher, the way it does when he's scared and frustrated. "They were really tall, Dad. Taller than you. And they were just standing there, staring at me." Lisa scooped him up in her arms, even though he's really too big for that now. "It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes shadows can look like people in the dark. You're safe." But as we walked back to our tent, I kept my flashlight moving across the tree line, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. The next morning brought bright sunshine and the kind of mountain air that makes everything seem possible. Connor seemed to have forgotten about his nighttime scare, and Emma was already planning a hike to the waterfall marked on the campground map. I should have listened to my instincts. Should have packed up and left right then. Instead, we spent a perfectly normal day, hiking, fishing in the stream that ran through the campground, playing cards when it got too hot to be in direct sunlight. Other families were doing the same things. Kids running around, parents relaxing in camp chairs, teenagers being teenagers. But I kept noticing things that didn't quite fit, like the way the birds went quiet whenever we got close to the tree line, or how our dog, Max, refused to leave our immediate campsite area. Max loves exploring new places, but every time I tried to take him for a walk beyond the campground's established boundaries, he'd plant his feet and whine, and there were the watching people again. This time I spotted them around noon, positioned at different points along the forest edge. 5 figures now instead of 3, all maintaining that same unnaturally still posture. When I pointed them out to Lisa, she looked right at them and insisted she saw nothing. "Tom, you're making me nervous. There's nobody there, Lisa. I'm looking directly at them. 5 people, standing just inside the tree line. Maybe you should see an optometrist when we get home." But Emma saw them too. She whispered to me after lunch, when Lisa was helping Connor with his fishing line, "Dad, those tall people, they've been there all day, haven't they?" My stomach dropped. "You can see them?" "Yeah. Mom can't." "No." "Can Connor?" Emma glanced toward her little brother. "I don't think so. But Dad, there are more of them now. I count 8. I looked again. She was right. 8 figures, spread out in a rough semicircle that seemed to encompass our entire section of the campground. That evening, as we were making dinner, other families started packing up and leaving. Not all at once, but steadily throughout the afternoon. By sunset, only 3 campsites remained occupied. Ours, and 2 others with families that seemed to be having the same kind of whispered conversations we were. The Hendersons, a family with 2 teenage boys, stopped by our site around 8 p.m. "You folks planning to stay another night?" Mr. Henderson asked, but his tone suggested he hoped we'd say no. "We were thinking about it," I replied. "Why?" "Just wondering." We're pulling out first thing in the morning. Kids want to get home early, but I could see it in his eyes. The same unease I was feeling. His boys kept glancing toward the tree line, and their camping gear was already half-packed. After they left, I made a decision. We're leaving first thing tomorrow morning, too, I told Lisa. Why? We booked this site for 3 nights. Something doesn't feel right about this place. Lisa studied my face in the firelight. Tom, you're scaring me. What's really going on? Before I could answer, Connor pointed toward the edge of our campsite. Dad, there's one of those tall people right there. I spun around, following his pointing finger. Standing just beyond the reach of our campfire's light was a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. At least 7 feet tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its torso. Its skin was pale, almost white, and it moved with a fluid motion that made my skin crawl. But the worst part was how it stood there, perfectly motionless, watching us with what I can only describe as clinical interest. Lisa, tell me you can see that. She looked directly at the figure, her face confused. See what? Tom, there's nothing there. The thing tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck, then stepped backward into the darkness. Pack everything. Now. I was already moving toward our gear, stuffing sleeping bags into their sacks. Tom, what's wrong with you? You're acting insane. Just pack, Lisa. Please. Emma helped without being asked, her face pale but determined. Connor seemed confused but followed our lead. Lisa protested for another few minutes, then started packing too, muttering about her husband's apparent mental breakdown. We had everything loaded in record time. As I was dousing the campfire, I looked up and saw them again. They'd moved closer. Much closer. At least a dozen figures now formed a loose circle around our campsite, all maintaining that same perfectly still posture. In the dying firelight, I could make out more details of their appearance. Elongated skulls, fingers that ended in points, movements that seemed to flow rather than step, and they were all watching us with an intelligence that made my blood freeze. Get in the car, I told my family. Right now. Dad, what about? Emma started. Get in the car. We piled into our SUV, leaving behind a camp chair and some scattered camping gear. As I started the engine, my headlights swept across the campsite. The watching figures didn't react to the sudden illumination. They just stood there, motionless and patient, as if they had all the time in the world. I put the car in reverse and backed out of our campsite as quickly as I dared. As we pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. The creatures were following us, not running, just walking with that same fluid motion, keeping pace with our vehicle as we drove toward the campground exit. Tom, slow down, Lisa said. You're going to hit something. I was doing maybe 15 miles per hour on the campground's gravel road, but it felt like racing. In my mirrors, I could see the pale figures flowing between the trees, always just at the edge of my headlight beams. We reached the main road, and I floored it. For the next 20 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see those things pursuing us down the highway. But they seemed to have stopped at the campground boundary, as if there was some invisible line they couldn't or wouldn't cross. We drove straight through the night, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. I told Lisa we'd find a motel somewhere and turn the rest of our vacation into a city trip. What I didn't tell her was what I'd realized during those last terrifying minutes at the campsite. The creatures hadn't been watching us randomly. They'd been studying us, learning our patterns, our routines, our family dynamics, and I had the sick certainty that if we'd stayed one more night, we would have become whatever those other missing campers had become, because I'd done some research after we got home. Pine Ridge National Forest has one of the highest rates of missing persons cases in the state. Families who check in for multi-day camping trips and simply disappear. Their campsites are found abandoned but undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no indication of where the occupants went, just empty tents and cold fire rings, as if the people had simply walked away into the forest and never looked back. We never went camping again as a family. When the kids ask why, I tell them we're just too busy with other activities. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about those pale figures standing in perfect formation around our campsite, patient and still and watching, and I wonder how many other families they're watching right now, learning their habits, waiting for the right moment to collect them. If you ever go camping and feel like you're being observed, if you see tall figures at the edge of your vision that others can't see, don't stay to find out what they want. Some things hunt in packs, and we're not at the top of the food chain in places like Pine Ridge. Pack up and leave. Drive fast and don't look back, because once they start watching you, the only thing between you and becoming another missing person statistic is how quickly you can get back to civilization. And even then, sometimes I catch glimpses of pale figures in my peripheral vision, standing just beyond the street lights near our house, still watching, still learning, still waiting. The cave we sheltered in wasn't on any map, and when I shined my light toward the back, I realized we weren't alone, and we might not be the first group to hide here. I'm Alex, and 3 years ago I was just another college senior looking for adventure before graduation. My buddies, Jake, Mike, and Tyler had been planning this hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia since freshman year. 5 days in the backcountry, challenging terrain, and the kind of stories we'd tell for the rest of our lives. We got those stories all right, just not the kind we were hoping for. The trouble started on day 3 when the weather turned nasty without warning. We'd been following a ridge trail that wasn't exactly marked on our topographic map. One of those old logging roads that shows up on some hiking websites, but isn't officially maintained by the Forest Service. Mike was our navigator, the kind of guy who could read contour lines like sheet music and never seemed to get lost. According to GPS, we should hit the main trail system in about 6 miles, he said, checking his phone for the dozenth time that morning. How's the battery holding up? I asked. Down to 30%. But we've got the backup power bank and the paper maps. Famous last words. The storm hit around 2 p.m. like someone had flipped a switch. 1 minute we were hiking under partly cloudy skies. The next we were getting hammered by wind and rain that seemed to come from every direction at once. We need shelter, Tyler shouted over the growing roar of the storm. He was our practical one, the guy who always packed extra gear and planned for worst-case scenarios. This isn't just a passing shower. Mike pulled out his phone to check the radar, and his face went pale. Guys, my phone is dead. Completely dead. It was at 30% 5 minutes ago. Jake tried his phone next. Same result. Dead battery. Wouldn't even power on. What about the power bank? I asked, already knowing the answer from Mike's expression. It's dead too. Everything electronic. It's just dead. We stood there in the increasing downpour, trying to process what had happened. 3 phones and a backup battery, all draining completely in the span of a few minutes. It didn't make sense, but we had more immediate problems. The rain was turning the trail into a muddy stream, and the temperature was dropping fast. Without our GPS, we were navigating by paper map and compass, assuming we could find any landmarks to reference. There, Tyler pointed through the rain toward a dark opening in the mountainside about 50 yards uphill from the trail. Looks like a cave. At least we can get dry and figure out our next move. The opening was bigger than it had appeared from the trail. A roughly circular entrance about 8 feet across, carved into the limestone face of the mountain. As we approached, I noticed something odd about the rock around the opening. It was smooth, almost polished, as if it had been carved rather than formed naturally. This doesn't look like a normal cave, I said, running my hand along the entrance. Look at these edges. They're too perfect. Jake shrugged, water dripping from his hood. Natural or not, it's dry, and we're not. He had a point. The storm was getting worse, and hypothermia was a real concern if we stayed out in the rain much longer. We ducked inside, shaking off water and fumbling for our flashlights. The beam of my LED light revealed a circular chamber about 15 feet across, with a relatively flat floor covered in what looked like centuries of accumulated debris. "Not bad," Mike said, setting down his pack. "We can wait out the storm here and reassess in the morning." But as I played my light around the cave, I noticed things that made my skin crawl. The walls weren't rough limestone like you'd expect. They were smooth, curved, almost organic looking, and there were marks in the stone, patterns that looked deliberately carved. "Guys, check this out," I called, moving my flashlight beam along the wall. "These markings, they're not natural." Tyler joined me, studying the patterns. He was an anthropology major, always interested in historical sites. "These look old, really old, like prehistoric old." The markings were definitely intentional, spirals and geometric shapes that seemed to flow around the chamber's circumference, but there was something unsettling about them, a quality that made my eyes want to look away. "There's more back here," Jake called from deeper in the cave. I turned toward his voice and realized what I'd taken for the back wall was actually another opening. The cave continued much further into the mountain than I'd initially thought. We gathered at the secondary opening, shining our lights into the darkness beyond. Our beams revealed a tunnel that sloped downward, disappearing around a curve about 20 feet in. "We should check it out," Mike said. "See how far it goes." "Are you insane?" Tyler shook his head. "We don't know anything about this cave system. What if we get lost? What if there are better chambers further in, places that are warmer, more protected?" I aimed my light at the tunnel floor, looking for signs of previous visitors. That's when I saw the first piece of evidence that we weren't the cave's only guests. "There's a water bottle down there," I said, pointing to a plastic Nalgene bottle lying on its side about 10 feet into the tunnel. "Recent one." Jake moved past me, picking up the bottle. "It's got water in it. And look." He held it up so we could see the label on the side. "Property of West Virginia University Outdoor Club." My stomach dropped. When was the last time WVU did a trip through this area? "No idea," Tyler said. "But if there are other people in here, or if there were other people in here," Jake corrected grimly. We stood there for a moment, processing the implications. Then Mike made the decision for all of us. "We need to see what's down there. If someone's lost or hurt, we should go get help instead of risking our own lives," Tyler argued. "With what? Our dead phones. In this storm?" Mike was already moving into the tunnel. "Besides, maybe they found a way out through the back. Maybe this tunnel connects to another entrance." Against my better judgment, I followed him. Jake and Tyler came too, though Tyler kept muttering about horror movie protagonists making stupid decisions. The tunnel sloped steadily downward, curving left and right in a way that made it impossible to see very far ahead. Our footsteps echoed strangely off the smooth walls, creating a sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. About 50 feet in, we found more evidence of previous visitors. "Backpack," Jake announced, pointing to a blue hiking pack that had been abandoned alongside the tunnel wall. "Looks like it's been here a while." I knelt down to examine it. The pack was covered in a fine layer of dust, and the fabric felt damp to the touch. When I unzipped the main compartment, a smell wafted out that made me gag. "What is it?" Tyler asked. I'm not sure. Something's rotting in here." I forced myself to look inside with my flashlight. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Mixed in with normal hiking gear was what looked like spoiled food, but the smell was wrong. Too sweet, too cloying. And there was something else. "Guys," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't food." Tyler leaned over to look, then stumbled backward, gagging. "Jesus Christ, Alex. What is that?" Because what was decomposing in that backpack wasn't trail mix or energy bars. It was organic matter that looked disturbingly familiar. Chunks of something that might once have been meat, now black and putrid. "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, backing toward the cave entrance. "Right now." But Mike was already further down the tunnel, calling back to us. "There are more packs down here. Lots more." Against every survival instinct I'd ever developed, I followed his voice deeper into the mountain. The tunnel continued to slope downward, and our flashlight beams revealed more abandoned gear scattered along the walls. Sleeping bags, camping equipment, hiking boots, and other things that made no sense. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to what appeared to be a child's stuffed animal lying in the middle of the tunnel. "That's not hiking gear." I picked up the toy. A small teddy bear, brown and well-worn. The kind of comfort object a kid might bring on a family camping trip. The bear's fur was damp and sticky. "How long has this stuff been here?" Mike asked, examining a sleeping bag that was so degraded it was falling apart in his hands. "Some of it looks recent," I said, pointing to a water bottle with a clear date stamp from 2 months ago. "But this sleeping bag, it's ancient, like decades old." Tyler was studying the tunnel walls again, running his fingers along the smooth stone. "These aren't natural formations. This whole tunnel system, it's been carved, deliberately shaped. By who? I don't know. But whoever did it had a purpose in mind." The tunnel curved again, and our lights revealed something that made us all stop dead. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber, easily 50 feet across and disappearing upward into darkness beyond our flashlight beams. But what caught our attention wasn't the size of the space, it was what filled it. Hundreds of items were scattered across the chamber floor. Backpacks, tents, clothing, personal belongings, decades worth of camping gear and personal effects, all arranged in rough concentric circles around the chamber's perimeter. "This is a graveyard," Tyler whispered. I played my light across the collection, picking out details that made my skin crawl. A wallet with family photos still inside. A graduation ring from 1987. Children's toys mixed in with adult hiking gear. "How many people?" Jake started, then couldn't finish the question. The answer was written across the chamber floor in decades of accumulated belongings. "Dozens of people. Maybe more. There's something else," Mike called from the far side of the chamber. His voice had changed, taken on a quality that made my blood freeze. "You guys need to see this." We picked our way across the debris field, trying not to step on personal items that belonged to people who would never reclaim them. When we reached Mike's position, he was standing at the edge of what looked like another tunnel entrance, but this one sloped upward instead of down. "It's a way out," he said. "This tunnel goes up. If we follow it." "We're not following anything," Tyler said firmly. "We're getting out of here right now. The way we came." That's when we heard the sound. It started as a low vibration. Something felt more than heard. The kind of subsonic rumble that makes your bones ache. Then it grew louder, more defined, scraping, like something massive being dragged across stone, and it was coming from the upward tunnel. "Move," I hissed, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Move now." We ran for the entrance we'd come through, flashlight beams dancing wildly as we stumbled over decades of abandoned gear. Behind us, the scraping sound grew louder, accompanied by something else. A wet, rhythmic noise like breathing through damaged lungs. The tunnel back to the surface seemed twice as long as it had on the way down. Our lights showed us the same smooth walls, the same deliberately carved passages, but now they felt like a trap closing around us. The entrance. Jake gasped, pointing ahead. "I can see daylight." He was right. Gray stormlight was filtering down from the cave mouth, the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. We scrambled up the final slope and burst out into the rain, gasping and shaking. "Don't stop," Tyler shouted over the storm. "Keep moving." We ran down the mountainside, slipping and sliding on wet rocks, until we reached the trail. Only then did we stop to catch our breath and look back. The cave entrance was just a dark hole in the mountainside, innocent and unremarkable. But as we watched, something moved in the shadows just inside the opening, something large and pale that seemed to flow rather than walk. "It can't come out," Mike said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Whatever it is, it can't leave the cave." He was right. The thing retreated back into the darkness, but I could feel it watching us from the safety of its underground domain. We hiked through the storm for another 6 hours before we found the main trail system. From there, it was only 2 more hours to the parking area where we'd left our car. We drove home in silence, each of us processing what we'd experienced. When we reached campus, we agreed never to talk about what happened in that cave, but I couldn't let it go. I spent weeks researching missing persons cases in the Appalachian region. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of people who'd vanished while hiking or camping in remote areas. Most were never found, and many of the disappearances clustered around certain geographic areas. Places where the limestone bedrock was honeycombed with caves and underground passages. Places where something might live deep underground, collecting the belongings of surface dwellers who wandered too close to its domain. I never went back to West Virginia. Jake, Mike, Tyler, and I rarely speak anymore. An unspoken agreement to let sleeping horrors lie. But sometimes I dream about that chamber full of abandoned belongings. About the families represented by those scattered possessions. About parents and children and partners who went into the mountains and never came home. And I think about what we heard moving in the darkness behind us. What kind of creature would collect the gear of missing hikers like trophies, or supplies for a very long existence in the deep places of the earth? If you ever find yourself sheltering in an unmapped cave, if you see belongings that don't belong to your group, if you hear sounds from deeper in the mountain that don't match any animal you know, get out. Get out immediately and don't look back. Because some things have been living in the hollow places of the earth far longer than humans have been walking on its surface, and they've developed a taste for the treasures we carry with us into their domain. The storm will pass. The cave dwellers are eternal. Choose your shelter carefully, because you might not be the only one taking refuge from the weather. My security job at the remote fire tower seemed perfect until I realized the forest below was moving in patterns, and something was climbing toward me every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. The name's Chris, and 18 months ago I thought I'd landed the ideal gig for a guy with my background. Former military, comfortable with isolation, good with technology. The Forestry Service needed someone to man the Harper Ridge Fire Tower during the peak season. 12-hour night shifts, decent pay, and all the solitude a person could want. The tower sits about 40 miles from the nearest town, accessed by a winding Forest Service road that most people don't even know exists. It's a traditional steel structure, about 80 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top equipped with radio equipment, weather monitoring gear, and panoramic windows that offer a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. My job was simple: watch for fires, record weather data, and report anything unusual to the district office. During the day shift, I'd sleep in the small bunkhouse at the tower's base. At night, I'd climb up and keep watch over roughly 200 square miles of forest. For the first month, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. Peaceful nights, spectacular sunrises, and the kind of silence you can only find in truly remote places. I read books, caught up on podcasts, and enjoyed the meditative quality of scanning the horizon for signs of smoke or unusual activity. But by the second month, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit. like the way certain sections of forest seem to move differently than others. Not the normal sway of wind through trees, but organized motion, patterns that looked almost deliberate. At first, I attributed it to my eyes playing tricks in the low light. Spending 12 hours staring into darkness can make anyone see things that aren't there, but the patterns became more pronounced, more consistent. Every night around 1 a.m., a section of forest about 2 miles northeast of my position would begin moving in what I can only describe as waves, trees swaying in sequence, creating a ripple effect that traveled from the ridgeline down toward the valley floor. There was no wind strong enough to cause that kind of motion, and it only happened in that one area, while the rest of the forest remained still. I started documenting what I saw, making notes in my shift log and trying to find rational explanations. Maybe there was an underground stream causing erosion. Maybe the soil composition in that area made the trees more susceptible to minor seismic activity. But the more I watched, the more convinced I became that something was moving through that section of forest. Something large enough to disturb the trees as it passed. The climbing started during my 6th week on the job. I was doing my routine midnight equipment check when I heard the first metallic ping from somewhere below. It was a subtle sound, barely audible over the ambient forest noise, but distinctive enough to catch my attention. The fire tower is built with a steel lattice framework, and anyone trying to climb it would have to use the metal rungs welded to the support beams. The sound I'd heard was exactly what you'd expect from someone gripping those rungs. I grabbed my flashlight and leaned out the cabin window, shining the beam down the tower's structure. Nothing but empty steel framework and darkness beyond the light's reach. "Hello?" I called down. "Anyone there?" No response. I kept listening for another few minutes, but the sound didn't repeat. I made a note in my log and went back to my routine. The next night, the same thing happened. A single metallic ping around midnight, coming from somewhere below my position. Again, my flashlight revealed nothing. By the 3rd night, I was ready for it. I had my light in hand and was watching the tower structure when I heard the sound. But this time, it came from a different direction. Not from directly below, but from the northwest side of the tower, as if something was circling the base, testing different approaches. On the 4th night, I heard multiple pings. Definitely the sound of something gripping the tower's metal framework, but scattered around the entire structure. Whatever was down there wasn't just testing one climbing route anymore. It was trying all of them. I called down to the base several times that night, even fired my service pistol into the air, anything to scare off whatever was lurking around my tower. The sound stopped after the gunshot, but I didn't feel any safer, because I was starting to realize that whatever was down there wasn't a normal animal. Bears can't climb steel towers. Mountain lions don't circle structures methodically. And no human would be wandering around a remote fire tower in the middle of the night without identifying themselves. The breakthrough came during my 7th week, when I decided to set up my night vision scope to monitor the tower's base. I'd brought the scope from my military days. A decent piece of equipment that could pick up heat signatures and movement in complete darkness. I positioned it to cover the area around the tower's base and settled in to watch. Around 11:30 p.m., the scope picked up movement at the tree line about 100 yards from the tower. Something large was moving between the trees, staying just at the edge of the clearing that surrounded my position. At first, it looked like a bear. The right size, the right general shape. But as I watched through the scope, I realized the movement was all wrong. It was walking upright, not occasionally, the way bears sometimes do, but consistently. Bipedal locomotion, with a gait that was almost human, but not quite. And it was studying my tower with obvious intelligence, moving around the perimeter to view it from different angles. At exactly 2:17 a.m., it made its move. The creature emerged from the tree line and approached the tower's base with purpose. Through the night vision scope, I could see details that made my blood freeze. It was roughly human-shaped but massive, at least 7 feet tall, with proportions that seemed stretched and wrong. Its limbs were too long, its torso too narrow, and it moved with a fluid grace that no human could match. But the worst part was its face, where a person would have features, eyes, nose, mouth. This thing had just smooth, dark surface, like someone had erased its face entirely. It began climbing the tower. I watched through my scope as it ascended the steel framework with impossible ease, moving up the lattice structure like it was walking on level ground. No hesitation, no difficulty with handholds, just smooth, continuous progress toward my position. I grabbed my radio and tried to contact the district office, but got nothing but static. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual given the remote location. The creature was about halfway up the tower when I made a decision that probably saved my life. I opened every window in the observation cabin and turned on every light I had available. Flood lamps, emergency beacons, even the flare gun I kept for extreme situations. I turned that tower into a lighthouse, bathing the entire area in brilliant illumination. The climbing stopped immediately. Through my scope, I could see the creature clinging to the tower framework about 40 feet below my position, its faceless head tilted upward toward my cabin. For a long moment, we regarded each other across that distance. Then it began descending, moving just as smoothly as it had climbed up. When it reached the ground, the creature stood at the base of the tower for several minutes, that blank face pointed directly at me. Then it turned and walked back into the tree line with the same purposeful gait. I kept every light burning until sunrise. The next morning, I climbed down to examine the tower's base. The steel showed clear scratches where something with incredible grip strength had ascended the framework. The marks were fresh, and they definitely hadn't been there the day before. I took photos and made detailed notes, then called my supervisor to report a wildlife encounter that had damaged tower property. "What kind of wildlife?" he asked. "I'm not sure. Something large. Maybe a bear that learned to climb." There was a pause. "Bears don't typically climb steel structures, Chris." "I know. That's why I'm reporting it." My supervisor arranged for a wildlife specialist to visit the tower and assess the situation. But when the specialist arrived 3 days later, he seemed more interested in my mental state than in the scratches on the tower. "Isolation can play tricks on the mind," he told me after examining the damage. "Long shifts, limited human contact. It's not uncommon for fire tower operators to experience heightened anxiety or paranoia. You think I imagined this? I think you experienced something that scared you, and your mind may have filled in details that weren't actually there." But he couldn't explain the scratches, and he definitely couldn't explain what happened that night after he left, because the creature came back, and this time, it brought friends. I spotted them on my scope around 11 p.m. Multiple heat signatures moving through the forest, all converging on my tower. At least 4 distinct shapes, all with that same wrong proportions and upright gait. They emerged from the tree line in formation, spreading out to surround the tower's base. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., they all began climbing at once, 4 faceless figures ascending my tower from different directions, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of intelligence and planning. I hit every light switch in the cabin and fired 3 flares into the air. The night lit up like daylight, and once again, the climbing stopped. But this time, they didn't retreat immediately. The creatures clung to the tower framework at various heights, their blank faces all turned toward my position, waiting, watching, testing my defenses. After about 10 minutes, they began descending, but slowly, reluctantly, as if they were learning from each encounter, adapting their approach. I knew I couldn't keep this up indefinitely. My flare supply was limited, and the tower's generator wouldn't run the flood lamps forever. Whatever these things were, they were getting bolder with each attempt. I requested emergency leave the next morning, citing equipment malfunctions that required extended maintenance. My supervisor wasn't happy, but he approved a temporary replacement and told me to take a week to sort out any technical issues. I drove straight to the nearest university library and spent 3 days researching everything I could find about the Harper Ridge area: local history, geological surveys, wildlife studies, anything that might explain what I'd been dealing with. What I found changed everything. Harper Ridge had a history of unexplained disappearances going back over a century. Loggers, hunters, hikers, people who went into that forest and never came out. The fire tower itself had been built on a site where 3 previous towers had been destroyed or abandoned under mysterious circumstances, and there were reports. Scattered references in old newspapers and Forest Service documents of night climbers in the area. Descriptions that matched what I'd been seeing: tall figures that moved wrong, creatures that could scale any vertical surface, things that seemed drawn to isolated structures and the people who occupied them. The final piece of the puzzle came from a 1973 incident report filed by a Forest Service employee named Patterson. He'd been manning the Harper Ridge Tower when something had attempted to break into his observation cabin during the night shift. Patterson described creatures with smooth, featureless faces that climbed the tower like spiders on a wall. He'd managed to fend them off using emergency flares and bright lights, but only temporarily. The report noted that Patterson had requested immediate transfer after the incident. It also mentioned that his replacement had lasted less than 2 weeks before abandoning the position entirely. The tower had remained unmanned for over a decade after that. I never went back to Harper Ridge. I called my supervisor and submitted my resignation, citing personal reasons. He tried to convince me to reconsider, but I'd made my decision. That remote tower job had seemed perfect for someone with my background, until I realized that some places are remote for very good reasons. Whatever those creatures are, they've been in that forest far longer than any fire tower. They've learned to associate isolated structures with solitary humans, and they've developed hunting strategies that take advantage of our need to maintain our posts. The Forest Service eventually filled my position. Some eager young graduate with a degree in environmental science and romantic ideas about communing with nature. I tried to warn him, sent an anonymous email describing what I'd experienced, but I doubt he believed it. The official reports list him as a missing person. His car was found at the tower's base, his personal belongings still in the bunkhouse, but no trace of the man himself. The observation cabin was found with all its windows broken from the outside, as if something had forced its way in. They've closed the Harper Ridge Tower permanently now. Too many equipment failures and personnel issues to maintain operations. But sometimes I wonder about those creatures, waiting in the forest around that empty steel structure, learning, adapting, preparing for the next time someone decides to take a job watching over their territory. If you ever see a posting for remote fire tower work, especially if the location seems too good to be true, if the pay is unusually high, if they seem desperate to fill the position, ask about the turnover rate. Ask about previous incidents. Ask why the job is available, because some places are isolated for very good reasons, and some things hunt best when their prey is alone, elevated, and nowhere to run. The climbing always starts at 2:17 a.m. Remember that, if you ever find yourself in a tower in the dark, and keep your lights ready. We thought we'd found the perfect campsite by the lake until we realized why the fish were so easy to catch, and why something much larger kept taking our bait. I'm Derek, and 5 years ago I considered myself an expert outdoorsman. 38 years old, been fishing and camping since I was a kid. Guided weekend trips for friends who wanted to experience the wilderness without the risk of getting lost or eaten by bears. I had a reputation for finding the best spots, remote lakes where the fishing was incredible, and the scenery was straight out of a nature documentary. That reputation almost got me and 3 of my best friends killed. The lake I'd discovered wasn't marked on any official maps. I'd found it by accident during a solo scouting trip, following an old deer trail that led up into the mountains of northern Minnesota. The trail wound through thick forest for about 6 miles before opening onto a pristine alpine lake, surrounded by towering pines and granite cliffs. It was perfect. Crystal clear water, no signs of previous human activity, and fish that practically jumped onto your hook. I spent 2 days there alone, catching more bass and northern pike than I'd seen in a decade of fishing more popular lakes. When I got back to civilization, I knew I had to share this place with the guys. Pete, my longtime fishing buddy who worked construction and lived for weekends on the water. Marcus, a software engineer who was always looking for the next adventure. And Ron, my brother-in-law who claimed to be a survival expert but had never actually tested his skills in serious wilderness. "You sure about these directions?" Pete asked as we loaded our gear at the trailhead. "This trail isn't even on the GPS." That's what makes it perfect," I told him, shouldering my pack. "No crowds, no competition, no rules about catch limits or camping permits, and no search and rescue if we get lost," Marcus added, but he was grinning. He loved the idea of discovering something that wasn't already posted all over social media. The hike in took about 4 hours, longer than my solo trip because we had more gear, and Ron insisted on stopping to photograph every interesting rock formation. But when we crested the final ridge and got our first view of the lake, everyone agreed it was worth the effort. "Holy shit," Pete breathed. "Derek, this place is incredible." The lake stretched out below us like a mirror, reflecting the surrounding peaks so perfectly it was hard to tell where the water ended and the sky began. The afternoon sun slanted through the pine trees, creating columns of golden light that danced across the surface. "And you said the fishing was good?" Marcus asked, already assembling his rod. "Better than good. Wait until you see." We set up camp on a small peninsula that jutted out into the lake, giving us water access on 3 sides and a clear view in all directions. The campsite was ideal. Level ground, good drainage, natural windbreaks provided by a cluster of mature pines. By 6 p.m., we had our tents up and a fire burning. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson that made the whole scene look like a postcard. "This is why I love camping," Ron said, cracking open a beer and settling into his camp chair, away from all the noise and stress of civilization. "Speaking of which," Pete said, assembling his fishing rod, "Derek promised me fish for dinner. Give me 20 minutes, I told him, rigging my own gear. "The bass in this lake are aggressive as hell. You'll be fighting fish before your bait hits bottom." I wasn't exaggerating. Within 5 minutes of casting into the lake, I had a 3-pound bass on my line. Pete hooked one shortly after, then Marcus. Even Ron, who usually spent more time untangling his line than fishing, managed to land a decent-sized northern pike. "This is unreal," Marcus said, releasing his 4th fish of the evening. "What do they eat in this lake to get so big and so active?" "Probably lots of smaller fish," I said, casting toward a promising-looking drop-off. "Isolated lakes like this can develop really healthy ecosystems when they're not overfished." That's when I felt something massive hit my line. The rod bent almost double, and my reel started screaming as whatever I'd hooked took off toward the middle of the lake. This wasn't a bass or a pike. This was something significantly larger. "Derek, what the hell did you hook?" Pete asked, watching my rod tip bounce wildly. "I have no idea, but it's huge." I fought the fish for about 10 minutes, gradually working it back toward shore. When I finally got it close enough to see, my blood went cold. It was a northern pike, but unlike any I'd ever seen. At least 4 feet long, with a mouth full of teeth that looked more suited to a shark than a freshwater fish. Its eyes were black and dead-looking, and its skin had a mottled, diseased appearance. Jesus, Ron whispered. That thing looks like it belongs in a horror movie. I managed to work the fish close to shore, but when I reached for my landing net, it suddenly thrashed with violent strength and snapped my 20-pound test line like it was thread. Did you see the size of that thing? Marcus asked. And those teeth? I've never seen a pike with teeth like that. Maybe it's just an old fish, I said, but I was shaken. In 30 years of fishing, I'd never seen anything that looked quite so wrong. Maybe we should try a different spot, Pete suggested. If there are fish that big in here, they might be eating all the regular-sized ones. But Marcus was already rigging a heavier line and a bigger lure. Are you kidding? I want to catch one of those monsters. Against my better judgment, we kept fishing, and we kept catching them. Over the next 2 hours, each of us hooked at least one of the massive, strange-looking pike. None of us managed to land one successfully. They were too strong, too aggressive, and they seemed to know exactly how to break our lines at the worst possible moment. It's like they're playing with us, Pete said after losing his third heavy fish of the evening. Like they're smart enough to know they can break free whenever they want. Fish aren't that intelligent, Ron argued, but he sounded uncertain. These ones might be, Marcus said quietly. As full darkness fell, we gave up fishing and focused on making dinner with the smaller bass we'd caught earlier. The fire crackled cheerfully, and the lake reflected our flames like a black mirror. That's when we started noticing the ripples. At first, they looked like the normal surface disturbance you'd expect from fish feeding at dusk. Small rings expanding outward from various points on the lake's surface. But the ripples were too large, too regular, and they seemed to be moving in patterns around our campsite. You guys seeing this? Pete asked, pointing toward the water. We all looked. The ripples were definitely circling our peninsula, as if something large was swimming around us just below the surface. Probably just those big pike we were catching, I said. They're feeding in the shallows, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The disturbances were too big, too coordinated. Whatever was moving down there was much larger than even those oversized pike. Maybe we should move back from the water, Marcus suggested. Set up camp further inland. It's just fish, Ron insisted. What are they going to do? Crawl out of the lake and attack us? He was joking, but his words sent a chill down my spine, because something about this lake felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. We banked the fire and settled into our tents around 10 p.m. I was sharing my tent with Pete, while Marcus and Ron had their own setups nearby. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when Pete shook me awake. "Derek," he whispered urgently. "Listen." I held my breath and listened to the night sounds. At first, I heard only the normal forest ambiance. Wind through trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Then I heard the splashing. It was coming from the water near our campsite, but it wasn't the random splash of feeding fish. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like something large moving through the shallows with purpose. "What is that?" I whispered back. "I don't know, but it's been going on for about 10 minutes. And Derek, I think it's getting closer." I unzipped our tent fly just enough to peer out toward the lake. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the water's surface, and what I saw made my stomach clench with fear. Something was moving just beneath the surface, creating a wake as it traveled parallel to our shoreline. Based on the size of the disturbance, whatever was down there had to be massive, much larger than any fish that should exist in a mountain lake. "Wake up the others," I told Pete, quietly. As Pete crept toward the other tents, I kept watching the water. The wake was definitely moving in a pattern around our campsite, as if the creature was studying us from below. Marcus and Ron emerged from their tents looking confused and annoyed, but their expressions changed quickly when they saw what was happening in the lake. "What the hell is that?" Ron whispered. "I think we need to pack up and leave," Marcus said. "Right now. In the dark?" Pete shook his head. "That trail is dangerous enough in daylight. We'll break our necks trying to navigate it with just flashlights. Then what do you suggest? I asked, before anyone could answer. The splashing stopped. The lake's surface smoothed out, becoming mirror calm in the moonlight. Whatever had been circling our campsite had either moved away, or a massive head broke the surface about 20 feet from shore. It was vaguely reptilian, but wrong in every detail. Too large, too angular, with eyes that reflected the moonlight like mirrors. When it opened its mouth, I could see rows of teeth that belonged on a prehistoric predator, not a lake fish. We all froze, not daring to move or breathe. The creature's head turned slowly, scanning our campsite with obvious intelligence. When its gaze fixed on our group, I felt a primal terror that went beyond rational thought. This thing was studying us, evaluating us, deciding whether we were worth the effort to hunt. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other across 20 feet of dark water. Then, without warning, the creature submerged again with barely a ripple. Did everyone else see that? Marcus whispered. We're leaving, I said. Pack everything. Now, Derek. We can't navigate that trail in the dark. Pete protested. We can't stay here either. That thing, whatever it is, it's not a normal lake predator. Ron was already stuffing his sleeping bag into its sack. I don't care if it's the Loch Ness Monster. I'm not spending another minute near this water. We broke camp in record time, working by flashlight and moving as quietly as possible. Every few minutes, one of us would check the lake's surface for signs of the creature, but it seemed to have disappeared entirely. Too entirely. As we shouldered our packs and prepared to leave, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The lake was completely silent. No lapping of small waves against the shore, no sounds of fish feeding, no ripples from wind or current. It was as if the entire ecosystem had gone dormant. What was hiding? Move fast, but don't run, I told the group. Stay together, and don't look back. We started up the trail that led away from the lake, using our headlamps to navigate the rocky path. For the first mile, everything seemed normal. Just 4 guys hiking out of the wilderness in the dark. Then we started hearing the sounds behind us. Not the creature from the lake. Something else entirely. Footsteps that matched our pace, staying just far enough back to remain outside our light beams. Something's following us, Pete said quietly. Just keep moving, I replied. Don't stop. Don't look back. But Marcus did look back, and what he saw made him stumble and nearly fall. Guys, he said, his voice shaking. Those aren't footsteps. What do you mean? I mean, whatever's behind us. It's not walking. I finally gave in to the urge to turn around, sweeping my headlamp beam back down the trail. For just a moment, at the very edge of my light's reach, I saw something that shouldn't exist. A dark, serpentine shape moving through the forest parallel to the trail. Too large to be a snake, too fluid to be any land animal I knew, and it was keeping pace with us effortlessly. Run, I said. Forget about being quiet. Just run. We ran through the forest like our lives depended on it, which they probably did. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Not just one creature now, but multiple shapes crashing through the underbrush. The trail seemed endless in the darkness. Every familiar landmark transformed into something alien and threatening. But gradually, we began to outdistance whatever was following us. By the time we reached our car at the trailhead, the forest behind us had fallen silent again. We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we reached the first town with street lights and 24-hour gas stations. Only then did we feel safe enough to talk about what we'd experienced. That lake, Marcus said, staring into his coffee cup. It wasn't natural. There's something wrong with the whole ecosystem. Those fish we caught, Pete added. They weren't just big. They were different. like they'd been changed somehow. Changed by what? Ron asked. I'd been thinking about that question for hours. I think that lake is a feeding ground for something that's been there a long time, something that's learned to cultivate its food sources. What do you mean? Think about it. Perfect fishing, no competition from other anglers, easy access to a beautiful campsite. It's too convenient, like a trap designed to attract exactly the kind of people who would make good prey. The others stared at me, processing the implications. You're saying that thing, whatever was in the lake, it's been luring people there on purpose? Marcus asked. I'm saying we weren't the first group to discover that lake, and the fish we caught, they were bait for something much larger. We never reported what happened. Who would believe us? Instead, we agreed to never speak about the lake's location, never guide other people to that area. But I still have nightmares about that serpentine creature moving through the forest, keeping pace with our desperate flight. And I wonder how many other perfect fishing spots are actually feeding grounds for things that have learned to use our own instincts against us. If you ever find a lake that's too good to be true, where the fishing is incredible, and the campsite is perfect, and there's no sign that anyone else has ever been there, ask yourself why. Maybe it's just luck. Maybe you found an undiscovered paradise, or maybe something has been very carefully maintaining that lake, keeping it stocked with oversized bait fish and free of human interference, because the best traps are the ones that make the prey feel like they've discovered something wonderful, and the most successful predators are the ones that let their food come to them. We were lucky to escape. Others might not be. So if you ever hear about a remote lake where the fishing is legendary and the camping is perfect, where every cast brings in trophy fish and every night offers spectacular sunsets, remember that some places are too good to be true, and some things have been fishing for much bigger prey than bass and pike. Stay on the marked trails, stick to the known lakes, don't go looking for hidden paradises in the wilderness, because sometimes paradise finds you first. And it's hungry. The fish always bite easy when you're the bait.